Hey, welcome back to JG3 Reviews. I'm James. I do pen and ink reviews, and today it is an ink review. This is the Birmingham Pen Company's Petroleum ink. You've heard me say before that there are not enough green inks in the world, and I especially like a green with a little bit of a twist. This is their Petroleum ink, named for the Kier refinery. Many of their inks named after Pittsburgh landmarks, and I really like this one. So let's get out the old dip pen, and I've also got a Majohn A1 with an extra fine nib that I keep inked up with the Petroleum ink, and let's see how this ink performs. One thing I like about Birmingham Pen Company's inks is that they tend to be a good, affordable ink. This is a 60 milliliter bottle, and if you watch, they do throw sales on ink from time to time. That's what it looks like inside the cap. You just know when it first comes out of the box from the mail that this is going to be a great ink. Just check that out. This pen and this ink just seem to work really well together. Again, this is Petroleum. And this is the Majohn A1 in extra fine. Okay, so as you can see, well saturated, especially considering this is extra fine. Not a lot of shading coming from this pen, but it is a really nice shade of green. Now it behaves differently. This is, by the way, Rhodia dot pad paper. It does behave differently with the glass dip pen, so let's get a little bit of that. This particular dip pen, just an inexpensive one. I got off of Amazon, I think. Not anything fancy, not anything trendy. Writes quite wet most of the time, and a pretty broad line. So generally, it brings out other qualities of an ink than a typical fountain pen might. And of course, this is also right after I dipped it, so it's well saturated, as you can see. This gives you a nice view of what the ink color is. With the glass dip pen, very, very wet. Then you get a little bit of feathering here, but I don't get this out of any of my fountain pens, only this overly wet dip pen. So now that I've written some of the ink off of that, then you start to see there's less of that feathering, and this gets into more what would be a typical line. So if I were judging how it's going to perform in a fountain pen, I'm going to look at this Majohn, which is kind of at one end of the spectrum, and then I would look probably about here. This is about typical wetness. This is if you were going to use it with a dip pen, something really, really just overly wet, well then you'll have to kind of watch out for that, test it on different paper and different pens. But in a typical fountain pen, this right here is what you're going to get out of this ink, and does quite well. You can see I made my grid with the Majohn, and of course there's no feathering, no issue there. When you flip the paper over, you will, of course, see from the glass dip pen, you're going to get some bleed through. From the Majohn, the only wetness I see that came through is where I rested the dip pen while I was talking. So that's from the dip pen. So a very wet pen, you might see some. And from the Majohn, not really. When I made the grid, a couple of those cross points, you have just a little bit that came through. Now I did check on a cheaper paper. This is just a small mini composition notebook from the dollar store, from Dollar General, I believe it is, made in India. And I tested both pens with this ink on this paper, and still there again, pretty much the same results as on the Rhodia. There is just a little dot there and a little dot at the cross of the B and the cross of the B there. Otherwise, that performed pretty well because this is a fairly bleed-prone paper, so that's actually quite good performance. I have a lot of pens with standard inks that have great reputations that still find their way through this paper now and then. Then the glass dip pen, not really much different from that Rhodia, which is surprising because this paper is not as bleed-proof as the Rhodia, and of course Rhodia is not bleed-proof, as you could see. So there you go, not bad on the cheap paper overall at all, and especially in that the extra fine in the A1, it did quite well. All right, we are going to recycle. That is Noodler's Golden Brown. I did not just clean out my ears for the first time since 1973. We're going to use the other end of that Q-tip because, you know, recycle, reduce, reuse, all that good stuff, or, you know, just being cheap and handy, you know, whatever. It was sitting right here. Here we go. Look at that. That's beautiful, ain't it? Ah, just beautiful. Look at that. Now you see why I like this ink and why I say we need more shades of green in the world. Now what about water fastness? Well, let me go get a little bit of water and we'll test. It's been drying for about 20 minutes or so. We'll see how that performs. All right, let's see how the water fastness goes. All right, let's see. Wow, not bad at all. Look at that. So that's the ink that came off on the paper towel. And I let that sit for a couple of minutes. Actually took the time to ink up another pen with this ink. And look at that. Not bad at all. You would be able to see what you wrote if it gets wet. I'm impressed. I did not expect it to be this water fast. Very good. And as you can see, it did further bleed because of that. But I would know what I wrote. Well, that's a nice bonus. All right, let's do a dry time test. I inked up this Jinhao 599 while the water was settling in to that sample, just to get a little bit more ink on the page, but not as much as that glass dip pen. And I give you another writing sample of this ink. So 5 seconds. And of course, not yet dry. 10 seconds. That's fairly dry. Let's try 15. And that's pretty dry. So a fairly quick drying ink. And here is a really good chromatography of the ink. So you can see all of that rich, saturated, there's dark blue right at the very edge there, and lots of green, a little bit of blue-gray through here, almost some yellow shading through there, very light, and then that probably is related to the black dye that is used there. So very interesting chromatography, I think, bringing out all the base colors of that ink. All right, as you can see, I really like the Birmingham Cure Refinery Petroleum ink. I encourage you to check this one out. That is just a gorgeous green color and a good performing ink. Again, if it's overly wet, like with that dip pen, you'll get a little feathering, but it dried quickly. The saturation is wonderful, and that water fastness test, better than I expected. And now you see why I keep this pen inked up with it all the time. God bless you. Have a great week. See you in the comments below, and thank you for all those likes, shares, and subscribes.